Wow, that's one heck of an introduction to live up to. Thanks a heap for that, James.
Don't let me down to you.
Yeah, the pressure. All right, so I am going to be chatting today about bird data. I'm hoping that this talk will bridge the session that we've just had talking about using technology to conserve birds and lead into the information sharing talks that we're having. I'm definitely these guys that are going to be talking about night parrots, their talk's going to be way more interesting than mine, so just pace yourselves, kids. All right, so if we're looking at collecting landscape scale data in WA, one of the first things that hits us is that we're a big state with a small population. We cover 34% of the continent, and yet we have only about 15% of the population, 60% of which is based in the Perth metro area. So if we are looking at any efforts that we make that are on a broad scale, we need to try and make the most of them. And so hence why I want to talk about bird data today. So there were three main points that I'm going to try and get across in today's talk. One is for those of you who don't know about bird data, what it is. Second point is how it can potentially work for you, and to use an example as to why collecting data and combining data into a larger data set is sometimes the only way that we're going to have even a remotest chance at answering questions about our birds. So monitoring, it's just none of you here, it's not news that monitoring is critical to species conservation. There's studies that have looked at the level of biodiversity monitoring in the country, and in general it's woefully inadequate. The proportion of species that have absolutely no monitoring element is really low, but when we look at birds we actually do quite well, and that is due primarily to the role of citizen science in collecting data. By being able to harness people who are out looking at birds recreationally and encouraging them to use their hobby and go forth across the country and record what they see, because they're knowledgeable and they have the capability and they have the capacity to collect that information under their own steam. So with a little bit of guidance, it's allowed us to towards structured monitoring. It means that we are better able to conserve species. Now, when we look at best practice for monitoring, there's been a few points that have come up as being critical. You need to be able to, if you're going to make any statement about a species, you need to be able to monitor it across its range. For some taxa that's really easy, but for a lot of taxa, particularly birds, that's quite difficult because they do cover really big areas. You also, best practice suggests that you should be recording at frequent intervals, and also you should have a long-term data set, and that your data should be transparent. Now, there has been a bit of discussion recently about how publicly available sensitive species data should be, and that's not something I really wanted to touch on now, but simply to say that if you are looking at doing monitoring, the purpose for which you are doing it should be clear. Your standards and principles for assessing sensitive species and protecting species information and location information should be quite clear and transparent, and also, as is also what you'll be doing with the data. So that's basically the framework that BirdLife has been using for a very long time. We've had a very strongly structured monitoring project in place for over the last 40 years. Many people in this room are very intimately connected with that, and that process is currently collected in the portal called Birdata. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Birdata is BirdLife's online, web portal and side-by-side mobile phone app that's used for collecting and hosting bird information. In general, when you're looking at digital technology, it's a really useful way of harnessing citizen science expertise. It cuts out a lot of the barriers that we'd ordinarily see. Adam, I'm really sorry, I've posted up a whole heap of your great cock account forms here, simply to illustrate my first point, that digital technology helps us streamline data collection. When you consider that you have interested people who have the capacity and the capability to go out and monitor, they go out and do it. Do they put the information on the form? Do they send it in? Do you receive it? Do you enter it in your database? Do then you get to answer whatever questions it was that you used to ask them to go out to begin with? Digital technology cuts through a lot of that by having a phone app that's portable. People, you skip all those submission steps where things can fall down. People can collect data on the go. It also facilitates structured monitoring. So by having a phone app, it can prompt people to answer all the fields that you want them to answer, the time and the date, the location, that they might otherwise leave blank because they go, oh yeah, I'll remember to put that in later, or Adam, who's running that, he'll know where I was and when I was surveying. It also prompts you to complete the survey, so you don't leave anything out. And one of the really neat things, particularly when it comes to bird data, is that the app has in situ error checking. So if you're trying to put in a bird observation that's a little bit hinky, if you walked out the back here at lunchtime and thought you saw western ground parrots, then the bird data app would ask you to have another look. It's much better for you to have a look now while there's a potential that the likely non-western ground parrot is in front of you and is in fact some other bird, than prompting you when you come home and you look at it and you go, oh yeah, that's a little bit odd, or when you send it in and whoever's collecting the data gets back to you and says, no, that's rubbish. So, in the nicest possible way in that instance. They can't tell you to look again because you've already left, and likely so has the bird that you were observing. So bird data was relaunched in September 2016, and I just wanted to chuck up some stats from WA just to show how uptake has increased over that time. So the top plot, I've got two plots there. They run with time along the bottom. The red dotted line that runs vertically is the date when bird data was relaunched. So the top plot shows number of monthly active observers. That has increased 250% to September 2016 levels, which is bloody fantastic. The number of surveys, you can see that in particular is it has lots of ups and downs. I also blame Adam for 3 of these points. So we have, that's a great cocky count, that's a great cocky count, and that's a great cocky count. You'll see that those 3 are increasing. Good work, Adam. But then we have other seasonal monitoring that where we're getting lots of surveys submitted in a short period of time. But despite all of that, this trend is increasing. We're seeing total number of surveys submitted per month in WA sitting from roughly around the 400 mark up to easily breaching the 600 mark. So we're seeing 160% increase in survey effort, which is super, and that's just keeping on growing. One of the really neat stats that I looked at was the contribution of the volunteers' time contribution. Using an app meant that people surveyed for longer, and the amount that they surveyed for longer was really phenomenal. So comparing pre-September 2016 levels to now, volunteers are spending 500% the amount of time surveying than they were previously. At the moment, that means for every hour of daylight in Western Australia, there are 9 hours of bird surveys being submitted in WA on West Australian birds. So if you just do even the simplest calculations and just account for that time spent surveying, not even considering the time spent to travel to and from fieldwork sites, you're looking at volunteer sort of monetary contributions of $100,000 a month, which is a pretty fantastic legacy, and it's just amazing that there are these people who are willing to go out and use their expertise and to contribute in this sort of fashion. But we sometimes ask the wrong question. We ask, why does the community like surveying for birds so much? And yes, there are people that do like to go out and want to contribute to the science, but people participate in citizen science for a lot of different reasons, and it's always important to remember that. So for some people, I can see some people are going to recognise themselves in these photos. In some instances, it's about environmental education. Sometimes it's about skills development. Sometimes it's part of a structured activity that you're doing with another group. It can be an opportunity for you to explore a new place that you just wanted an excuse to go to. You can use it to answer other questions that you have, so to answer maybe environmental or landscape level questions. But you can also use it to meet a like-minded community, and that sort of community interaction is one of the really important aspects to citizen science monitoring. So one of the really important things that bird data needs to do is that any citizen science or bird collecting model monitoring model needs to do is it needs to not just be a one-way take of information, but the information needs to be shared as well. And so bird data does do this. It acts not only as a portal for data collection and data storage for an individual or for a researcher, but it also allows a potential for data exploration. So this can be seen for both individual citizen scientists, but also for researchers and friends of groups and anybody else who, any other real person or artificial sort of organisation, school, class, whoever sets up a bird data account. They can use it to collect their own data, to store it, and to explore what's in the database. And this can be really important. So one of the ways that we encourage community contribution is through the idea of shared sites. So anybody can set up a shared site if it's a space that's publicly accessible. What it does is it means that if you are out collecting data at fixed times of year, but because of financial constraints or time constraints, you are not able to sample as frequently as you'd like, you can ask for assistance from the general public. So it allows you to increase the amount of data that you're pulling in for your research project. So BirdLife uses this on a lot of fronts for a lot of our different programs. We use it for our Key Biodiversity Areas program, for Shorebirds 2020. We use it in WA for the Great Western Woodlands project and for the Great Cocky Count. And what we see is that because the app prompts people when they're in a particular location, it says, hey, did you know there's this survey area in your general vicinity? People are more likely to make the effort to contribute when they're prompted to. I wanted to sort of finish up with why you should be considering contributing to bird data and what the benefits of having access to a large data set can be. I thought I'd pick on a project that I was involved with a little bit. So I wanted to look at the Birds of the Great Western Woodlands project, a project that BirdLife ran in a funded capacity from 2012 to 2014, and that is now a completely volunteer-driven project, but is still doing amazing stuff. And I wanted to look at purple-crowned lorikeets. So Great Western Woodlands, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's the largest intact temperate woodland on the planet. It's 16 million hectares. It is bloody enormous. Prior to this project, we had very little understanding of not only what the bird community composition was, but also how those species were trending. So the project was designed to collect data from all the different birds at a number of fixed survey sites, add to that with additional opportunistic studies. And so that happened intensively over a three-year project. When we pulled out the data for purple-crowned lorikeet, we were able to piece together some more of the historical data as well. And we saw this, and we detected this trend that even though over the short time of the project, the number of purple-crowned lorikeets had increased, when you consider it in terms of a long-term data set, we were seeing a longer-term decline. What we also found was that the reporting rate, the likelihood that you're going to encounter a purple-crowned lorikeet in a survey varied dramatically with the amount of eucalyptus blossom. That's unsurprising. They're a nectar feeder. The more eucalypt blossom there is, the more likely you are to see purple-crowned lorikeets. But when we looked at the data from the project within the Great Western Woodlands, the patterns of purple-crowned lorikeets were really quite variable. And we found that in essence, we were struggling to answer the question of what do the birds do when they're not inside? What do the birds do if they're not inside the Great Western Woodlands? Where do they go? How do they get there? And so I just wanted to pull up some quick cheeky data from straight out of bird data that looks at purple-crowned lorikeets in the southwest. Outlined in black here, which I see given this lighting is a poor colour choice, is the boundary for the Great Western Woodlands. That's 16 million hectares. I've just overlaid a 1 degree grid on that. If you can see the satellite imagery, it means there weren't enough surveys in that area to collect data. If you see white, it means there were absolutely zero purple-crowned lorikeets recorded. If it was any shade of blue, it means there were purple crowns recorded. The darker the colour, the more likely people were encountering them. So we looked at this data in autumn and spring for the 3 years of the project, so we had 6 different time periods. I also extrapolated this to look at what other records outside of the Great Western Woodlands in the southwest that we were getting purple-crowned lorikeets. So this autumn 2012, we can see that there's a little patch down here, but we've got very low numbers of purple crowns in the Great Western Woodlands themselves, but they're not jumping off the map anywhere else in particular other than this cell here. If we scroll through, so from autumn 2012 to spring 2012, we're seeing numbers in the Great Western Woodlands increase. In the wheat belt, it's white, that's unsurprising. Bit of blue on the south, along southwest. Autumn the following year, so same time of year as the first slide, but the amount of blue, like we've got a huge increase in number of purple crown lorikeets, and yet we're not seeing necessarily a huge number across their distribution, mostly just in the woodlands. That implies the birds have either moved there from other areas or that they're breeding quite substantially there. Then spring 2013 looks like they're starting to retract. We're getting a lot paler numbers, or we're getting sort of a lot paler colours. Then in autumn 2014, the concentration of purple crowns seems to be mostly along the southern part of the area. And then in spring 2014, we've got a big concentration here and then a big concentration here. What this suggests to us, imagine if you were doing a study project in just one of those grid squares. What conclusion could you draw about purple crowned lorikeets if you just had one of those squares to look at? I just pulled out some cheeky data. It wasn't purposely designed outside the Great Western Woodlands, it wasn't purposely designed as a really well designed study. I just made use of the existing data that was there, and yet it can answer some questions about purple crowned lorikeets for us on the back of this existing project. So it suggests, one, that there was no blue up here at all. We're getting no movement of purple crowns across the northern part of the wheat belt. That's not surprising given the amount of clearing. The movement we do see is along here. When we see big numbers of birds here, it doesn't also correlate with high densities of birds there. So we start to have some answers to questions that otherwise we wouldn't be able to answer. So that's one of the wonderful things about that's one of the legacies of having a long-term data set and being able to access it as a researcher and a practitioner and a land manager. At the moment, it's 40 plus years of bird monitoring. There's 1.2 million surveys. We've had over 11,000 people contribute surveys to Birdata, which is just outstanding. It gets great results for our birds, so I have to finish really with a plug and say, if in doubt, join us. If you're sitting on data that you are not really doing anything with, or you're struggling to answer questions with it, talk to us about how it can be included into Birdata, and maybe we can help see the bigger picture. And do it not just for your work, but do it as an individual as well. Birdwatching's fun. Get out there.